All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Meet the Mets Fans podcast. I'm here for episode number 2 with my co-host, Justin. Justin, welcome to the pod.
I'm excited, Stefan. This is gonna be a fun little episode we got going on here.
Yeah, we got a lot of things jam-packed in here for everyone. Our State of the Mets segment, some David Stearns comments today, but what we're going to start with is our amazing beginning segment, learning a little bit about our co-host, Justin. Justin, take it away. Tell us your origin story.
Yeah, first I want to congratulate you and Sid on a great first episode. I listened, obviously. Some of our colleagues were on it, and it was overwhelming. Really positive news from both of you guys. So really well done on the first one, and I'm excited to continue this. And hopefully this is a nice little tradition we got going on here.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, so my story is probably a lot like pretty similar to a lot of others. There's not one defining moment in which I said that's when I became a Met fan, but for me, and I think that's what's great about baseball is that it's something that can just be always on in the background. And I grew up in a household where my mom, my dad are just huge Met fans, and I'm at the kitchen table eating dinner, and there was always a game on. For some people, they think it's horrible that it's 162 games. For me, it is like it's therapy, right? Being able to every single night knowing I can watch the Mets, right, at some point. And there's some sports where if you miss 5-10 minutes of it, you missed a big portion of a game, but you can jump into a Met game or any really baseball game, right, and kind of say, what happened there? How'd we score? Alonso hit a double to left field. And all right, yeah, all right, I got caught up. And I think that's what's great about baseball, and something for me that I'll always treasure, really. Is the ability to have that thought of it always being on the background and something that is a comfort to me.
Man, it's a beautiful story, and I think every single Met fan has that story, like that story that brought them and connected them, whether it's over the course of time or a particular moment like it was for me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And, I got to ask you, where did this podcast come from? You came to me one day and you said, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast, right? And I gotta know, where did this come from? What was your thought? How did this come to fruition?
I don't know, man. It popped up in my head after really honestly having conversations with fans like you. One of our colleagues was listening in one day on us having a conversation, and they were like, what are you doing? Like, how are you so invested in this? You guys know that you can't actually tell David Stearns what to do, that your opinions on what the Mets should do don't matter. Yeah, no, I agree with that, right? Like, David Stearns is not listening to me. He's probably not listening to this podcast, but being able to talk about it is part of the therapy. And I feel like giving fans a real opportunity to talk on a podcast and to come onto the channel with us, which is something we hope to be able to do, is to bring real fans on here to tell their stories, why they love this team, how they feel about it. And it's not a media personality that's doing it. It's not this show that's created by someone who has a ton of experience. I have a journalism background. I went to school for journalism, but I went to school for journalism and decided to become an educator. So I really didn't dive into that part of my career, but I feel like I'm tapping into some of those things that I was passionate about when I was younger. And really, I wanted to be a journalist, to be a sports journalist. I was into sports news and I was into baseball. And I feel like this gives me a little bit of an outlet personally to be able to do something I love, talk about the team that I love. And I think if given the opportunity, other real Met fans would love this opportunity to come onto a podcast and do the whole thing, to start, like, plan it, sit down and do a run of show with me and express how they want to convey their love for this team or their hatred for the team in a particular moment. I think that could be really special and really unique. And I said, hey, why not give it a shot? It's at least at the minimum, if no one listens to this, it's going to be fun. All right, we're going to have a good time doing it.
Nah, no doubt. I love it. This is cool. I think a lot of people are going to get tuned in, early on. We're going to probably no one watching this right now, but you know what? Our name's out there right now, right? And
Hey,
we're gonna do it.
30 people, almost 40 people watched the YouTube. All right, we have some followers, and it's probably just all of our friends, but that's okay. It'll grow. We want to invite you all to join us on the podcast. The way that you can do that is through Instagram. You can send me a message, direct message on Instagram. You can email us as well at meetthemetfans25@gmail.com. You can send me an email. You can direct message me on social media through the Meet the Mets Fans Instagram. And we will set up a time to chat with fans and try to get as many people on here throughout the season as possible to talk about their stories.
I love it. Let's get into it. This is our episode, so I gotta take advantage right now. So let's get into this right now, Mr. Singh.
All right, let's go. Segment 2 is going to be the state of the Mets. We are going to talk about how we are feeling about the team. Like I said on the first pod, throughout the season, this segment is going to be what's happening right now. And what's happening right now with the Mets, and this thing that popped up that I think we talked about is kind of confusing. There was a report that owners received a memo from MLB that they lost $1.8 billion this past year. Specifically, the Mets lost the most money. They lost over $350 million. That ballpark was packed this year. That same report explains that the Mets had the most revenue from their ballpark sales ever. So how did we have the most revenue ever but took a $350 million loss? Like, where did this come from? How's it possible?
Yeah, I obviously am not an expert in finances over here. We don't know exactly what the books look like for the New York Mets, but the reports are coming out. Now, the report was coming from Bob Nightingale. And so let's just take that first off with a grain of salt, okay? The things that he says sometimes are just out of this world. Some of his reporting has been pretty shoddy. But you know what? It's possible. When we take a little bit like a deep dive into like some of the things, again, these aren't like specifics, but they're saying the Mets lost $350 million. Okay. That's a large figure. That is more than our entire payroll that we had for this past season, right? Which was about $341 million. Like you mentioned, right? The Mets set a single season record, right? So this by far, right? Over 3.1 million fans, right, came to the ballpark this year, earning over $158 million for the New York Mets. And that's just ticket sales. Now we're looking at concessions, we're looking at parking, we're looking at advertisement. What I saw was that the Mets made over $300 million in revenue. Now, if you're telling me that with operating costs and budgets, and honestly, Juan Soto signing bonus of $75 million this past year, that the Mets may have lost $350 million, it's possible. I can let you know that for Met fans, I don't think any of us feel bad for Steve Cohen. The man is filthy rich. He's selling a gold toilet right now for $10 million. I know it's his gold toilet. If anyone has seen that, okay? It's a piece of art, allegedly, and it's going for $10 million on auction right now. So, I'm having a hard time feeling bad for this $350 million loss. Now, is this sustainable? It's not. The New York Mets and Steve Cohen can't lose $350 million every single year. And, I think when we were taking a look at a little bit deeper into the numbers, right, it looks like I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Mets didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, so if you don't make the playoffs, there's a lot of revenue that you're losing. You're not selling tickets at those extreme prices. Concessions are not being sold at those extreme prices. They make special jerseys and merchandise for a playoff team. These things are not getting sold, and so there's going to be a loss. If you look back at the Mets in 2024, the Mets also had a loss, according to the numbers that we're able to find, but that loss was significantly less than the loss from this year. And in 2023, the loss was much bigger than it was in 2024. And so, like, we're just regular fans here looking at the numbers and what we can find on the internet, and not making the playoffs makes a whole lot of sense for why you don't make a lot of money. And so I think the question then is Steve Cohen, with this big loss, going to be willing to spend the amount of money that he's spending every single year? Is he going to be motivated to spend again?
Yeah, and I think that's the question every Met fan wants answered. And I'm going to say that track record is pretty clear that he's going to spend that money. We're going to have a deep dive into David Stearns at the GM meetings over in Nevada the past couple of days, and that question kind of got brought up. And of course, Stearns, who is this very analytical, very even-keeled, well-spoken individual, budget got brought up, and it was never, yeah, we got to maybe reset. We got to go back. We're not going to spend money. The answer was pretty clear. Yeah, we are in lockstep, in terms of David and Steve and what we need to do to make this organization better and this team better. And I think that from what we're hearing and really what Steve Cohen has proven is that he's going to spend money. Now, do I think that it's going to go past that $341 million mark? I don't think so. If David Stearns is able to convince Steve Cohen that this player is going to put us over the top and it's guarantee win, which again, that's not going to happen. Maybe he jumps over that figure, but I think that I think that we can feel at ease that the New York Mets are going to do stuff in the offseason, right? And that this loss, maybe it's a loss, but I don't think it's going to prevent the Mets from doing things that they need to do.
Steve Cohen promised Met fans a championship in 5 years. It's been 5 years. That championship is not here. In fact, feels further away than it did a year ago. I think that if we are right that making the playoffs impacts the revenue that a team makes, which makes sense to us. He's going to be very motivated to get back to the playoffs. This team needs to be a playoff team. Steve knows that. David knows that. I fully believe he's going to spend money on making this team good. I think he might go past it if like you said, if the right player is there and it helps this team win games.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I saw that, Toronto making to the World Series, they earned about $50 million, right, in revenue just from that playoff run that they had. And when you think of, like you mentioned, that 2024 season, that magical season that we had, making to the NLCS, right, that I made a difference, especially in the revenue that we were able to, like, for the Mets to receive there. So, it's one thing to for media poke fun. Mets didn't make the playoffs, but I think it's more than that. Like Steve Cohen he's a fan, but he's also it's a business here. Like we can't. It's not sustainable to be losing $350 million on a yearly basis, and so it matters. There's big revenue sharing pots that happen for playoff teams.
Before we jump to our next segment, we're going to do a little promo. I'm
Oh
Justin
yeah.
going to take this one away.
All right, I got it. This episode is sponsored by Naguntatag Oysters. Looking to elevate your next gathering? Book a private backyard oyster bar with our friend Keith Powell. You let his team bring the raw bar experience right to you. Freshly chucked, local, for unforgettable. Here's a special offer for our listeners. You mentioned Meet the Mets fans to Keith Powell, and you get 10% off a private oyster bar booking. I said Naguntatag Oysters. It's a cold water taste and a warm water state of mind.
Yeah, let's give it up for our guy Keith. We're going to jump into our next segment now, the Around the Apple segment. And the big news around the apple for the Mets right now is David Stearns met the media this week at the GM meetings in Vegas. So we touched on it a little bit. Justin, we're going to dive into this. Take us through your big takeaways from David Stearns at the GM meetings.
Yeah, David spoke now 2 days ago since we're recording this thing, and there's obviously it's a about a 30-minute interview that goes on with David Stearns. We're not going to go through every single question. For what a lot of people are doing on this podcast is they want to hear like what's happening in a little snippet, and I think that's what we kind of can provide for them. And so, some of the big takeaways that I personally had from David Stearns, and I've listened to this thing now a few times, is number one, the biggest takeaway I had here is that yes, he talks about run prevention. He talks about how we need to improve our defense. But I really believe, based on what he is saying, is that the number one thing that the New York Mets needs to do is that they need to hunt for a big time starting pitcher. They need an ace. Okay. There is no doubt that what happened last year is stinging the New York Mets. It's stinging David Stearns. It's stinging Steve Cohen. And they realize that they need a stopper. They need someone that can go in and say, I got to stop this bleeding that's happening right now during the season. And so I truly believe that the Mets are going to go big game hunting for a starting pitcher. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you love to hear it, right? That Sid talked about on our last podcast, like David Stearns can figure it out like he did 2 years ago, and he believes in that. And I don't want to hear any of that. I want to hear that we need an ace because we do, and maybe we have an ace in Nolan McLean, but we don't know that, right? He was wonderful. I think we all love him. We fell in love the way we fell in love with Jacob deGrom, and hope he is our next Jacob deGrom. It was a very small sample size. I wish that for him, and maybe we have an ace, but why can't we have two? Right, so I think you're right. Big game hunting is the deal. I'm super excited about it. I'm glad David Stearns is on the same page as every other Met fan.
Yeah, when I listened to Stearns, I felt like his narrative changed a little bit, right? For the last couple of years, especially when he first took over this organization, he talked about, and Steve Cohen talked about this also, is that we want to be like the Dodgers. We need sustained success. And they talked about how important it was to create depth in their minor league system. And they said that pretty much going forward is that they're not looking to trade those pieces. We're trying to build something here. We're trying to have a winner over X amount of years. Those comments changed a couple of days ago. If you listen to David Stearns said the kind of complete opposite. He said, we got that depth. We built up, and again, there's different ranking systems. You got Baseball America ranking this as the number one farm system here in Major League Sports. Is that he trying to change his narrative? Said we got the depth. We have some pieces right now that are going to be used to make the major league team better. And I think that to me was one of the things that resonated with me when I heard him talk about how he's going to trade some minor league guys. He's not going to get rid of everyone, but he knows that the minor league system, some of those guys are going to be used to help the major league team, right? And I'm super encouraged with some of the thoughts that he had during those meetings.
it's important, right? If these guys are ready, we got to use them. And that's either to help this team win games at the major league level or to move them to get pieces that help this team win at the major league level.
I know you mentioned Mark Vientos, and I
My
know
guy Mark, look,
he's a
he's right
bobble.
here.
I know he's a
Mark.
bobblehead in the back, and I know that's your boy, right? Swaggy D, right? The second takeaway I got from David Stearns, I think Mark Vientos is getting shopped this winter. There was a question that got posed about third base, and it wasn't a question of did Brett Beatty earn more playing time. David Stearns said that. That's what he got out of that question. It wasn't Mark Vientos. It wasn't Ronnie Mauricio. It was, I believe that Brett Beatty took a step forward and that he deserves more playing time. Is that he changed the narrative that we have with this guy, and this guy deserves more playing time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Mark Vientos, and I think I love him from 2024 Mark Vientos, like we all do. He had a terrible 2025 season, and like no one can deny that, even if you love him. He did not have a great 2025. Does that mean I don't think he's going to be the 2024 player that he can return back to that? I think he can return back to that. But I think that David Stearns made it clear that Brett Beatty is the third baseman of this team, unless they make a major addition or they trade Brett Beatty. Right. So yeah, Mark Vientos is probably getting shopped, unfortunately.
We'll see. That bobblehead might be going down in a couple of months, my friend. All right. It
We'll
might be
see.
going down. The last thing I took out of day one, right? And there's a bunch, right, for me personally, but the last thing, the major thing I took out is that, center field, especially during the trade deadline, was a hot topic. And we filled it with Cedric Mullins. And we saw what Cedric Mullins did. Ryan Helsley, bad. Cedric Mullins might have been worse, right? Like, at least Helsley for like 6 games gave us a little bit.
Yeah.
Cedric Mullins. I mean, the guy he was
If I
a
never
net
see
negative.
Cedric Mullins play another game of baseball again, I'll be excited.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so, what's interesting is that we kind of go into the offseason saying, if during the trade deadline, we filled that void or tried to fill that void with a trade package and it didn't work out, they must be going now for, a center fielder, right, in the offseason. Up the middle defense is something that Stearns really stresses. The takeaway was he kind of mentioned we like our internal options. Specifically, obviously, he loves Taylor. He loves his defense. He talks about how the offense is kind of lacking, but he does respect and understand his worth in his defense. And then really, he again unprovoked says Carson Bench. He's got an opportunity to make the team right out of spring.
Yeah, yeah. Carson Bench is the future of center field for the New York Mets, and I know a lot of fans are wondering about a guy like Harrison Bader being signed as like the temporary stopgap. Bring in Harrison Bader. He can man center field. He's a great defender, and then he won't ever have to hit against us, because he crushes us. So if we bring Harrison Bader in, he gets to be the stopgap, and I think that David Stearns is pretty much saying like that's not necessary. We have Tyrone Taylor. He's an excellent defender, and we're good with him batting 9 and not producing a whole lot of offense because Carson Bench is our guy.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if you're thinking the Mets are going to go get a big center fielder, they're not. Although my offseason plan of bringing in Bellinger, I think could still work here. Right? Like I don't think Benj being the center fielder means Bellinger is not an option for the Mets. I think that Bellinger is the perfect guy. Tyrone Taylor should be a fourth outfielder. And if you sign Cody Bellinger to a contract, a major league contract, to be your center fielder to start, it's with the assumption that Benj is going to come up and take that job. And then Bellinger is going to let every other guy, Brandon Nimmo gets a bunch of DH days. Pete Alonso gets DH days. I know that he pretty much said that Juan Soto is not going to DH a whole lot. They believe that Juan Soto's defense can improve is one of the things that Stern said at the meeting. There are going to be days where it would benefit him from DHing as well. And bringing in a guy who's an elite hitter in Bellinger to fill those spots makes your defense better every single day, regardless of where he's playing. So yeah. I'm still in the camp of let's bring in Bellinger and have Tyrone Taylor be a fourth outfielder.
Yeah, I think we all love Cody. And I think Yankee fans, I think the Yankees, I think Cody loves the Yankees, right? And I think it's
New York. Maybe he just and Queens is a nice place.
Yeah, that blue and orange, right? It is beautiful, right? I'm looking at it right now, right in the back of you, and it looks really nice. I'm not sure if that's going to pry him away from them, but we'll see. We'll definitely get to Cody later on in this pod because he's a name that gets brought up that I think is just really, really intriguing for this offseason. And we're going to see possibly if that really makes sense for the construction of this roster.
Yeah, so let's jump into day 2 now. I'll start with my major takeaways. One of my big takeaways is Jet Williams is not ready. Like you said on day one with Carson Bench, he voluntarily told us that Carson Bench has a chance to make this major league team, that's your guy. What David Stearns said on day two about Jet Williams is, I'm not closing the door to him to where he's going to play. And that means he could maybe make the team and convince us in spring training that he should be there. But really, I think he's telling us that he's not ready yet. They still want to see more production and more growth from Jet Williams, and he's probably starting the season in Triple.
Yeah, I think anytime you hear not closing the door, means that door is pretty much closed, right? There's a little bit of
You think he's lying to us?
little light, yeah, a little light that's coming out, right? You're trying to peek out, but basically he's saying that he doesn't really trust Jet Williams right now for whatever the reasons are. He's been a number one prospect for us in our organization for the last couple of years. I know he was injured 2 years ago now, and he had a season last year. He was finally healthy. In terms of developmentally, I don't know if they're looking for more offensively, defensively, but it seems like you're like you mentioned, the language of not closing the door. That's not a good sign for a player coming up. Now, actions speak louder than words, right? If this guy can come out, right, and he hits 400 in spring training, that's going to put a lot of pressure, right, on David Stearns and the New York Mets on making a decision for this guy and putting him down in the minors.
Yeah, it makes sense to leave it open, but sounds like the door is closed. My next big takeaway is on another second baseman on this team. Is on Luis Angel Acuna and his value to the team. Stearns spoke kind words about Acuna. And essentially said that he thinks he has a place on a major league team. But when he talked about every other guy on the team, he talked about those guys in terms of the Mets. Jet Williams can help the Mets. Carson Bench can help the Mets. When he talked about Acuna, he said Acuna has a high floor and he brings value to major league teams. He didn't say the Mets. And maybe that's like a slip of words or whatever, but he was, I don't know. David Stearns is a pretty smart guy. And what I got out of that is he's trying to hype up Acuna. Hey guys, other GMs, this guy can help you. I'm going to look to trade him. He still has value, even though we tanked his value all year by not using him at all. And then when we had opportunities to use him, we didn't. We didn't bring him in the spots that we should have used him. Acuna had a bad year last year, I think. And I do think he has value as a bench player. But the Mets made him into a bench player and tanked his value. And I think David Stearns is trying to build that value back up and hopes to sell him to some major league team. He's not a stud. He's not a superstar, but he can help you.
Yeah, I mean, we saw 2024. He stepped in, okay, when Lindor gets hurt at the end of the season in September, and he was electric. He hit 6, 7 home runs just in September alone, played great defense, stepped in. He played like a veteran down a home stretch in which the New York Mets couldn't lose games. And he was a big part of why the Mets wound up making the playoffs that year. And so coming into this 2025 season, I was excited. I said, this guy might be the real deal. His brother, Ronald, obviously is elite. When healthy, he's 1-2, right, in terms of best players on this planet. But, I'm with you. Like that, David Stearns is he's pretty analytical, man, and he's pretty thoughtful with his words. And I felt like he was pretty specific when he doesn't really talk about Ronald Acuna and the New York Mets. Oh, God, Ronald. Luis Angel Acuna on the Mets. I wish it was Ronald. I'll take him. Right, and maybe they'll make a trade, right? Maybe the Braves, maybe they'll feel bad for us.
Yeah, the Braves ain't feeling bad for us. We're not getting Ronald Acuna. Don't be ridiculous. We can speak Ronald Acuna's name every time we say Luis Angel's name, but we ain't getting him.
I wish he was the same. All right, my big takeaways. I'm going to be honest. You guys are going to come out of this podcast and you guys are going to be like, wow, Justin really hates this guy. And I don't hate this guy. And he's in the background for a reason of saying, I know he loves him. He won his jersey last year, that Swaggy V, okay, that City Connect. But David Stearns, I think he hates Mark Vientos, right? He legitimately said
he doesn't hate Mark Vientos.
He says he doesn't want to see him play the field. The only way Mark Vientos is going to make this club and be a part of this organization is through his bat. That's what I took out of those comments. And I know he has got some praise. He says he has a great 2024 season. He didn't have a great 25. When he squares up the ball, he hits it hard. That's what makes Vientos great. And maybe in 2025 he didn't get to some of those like levels that he could have. But I got to be honest, man. I just can't see this guy being on this team. Mark Vientos feels like the Mets hate him, right? Like during the trade deadline, you heard him make those comments. It's like he's like, I'm not liked. I don't know why by this organization, but I'm not a liked player. I don't know what I've done here for them to not like me. But some of those words it seemed a little harsh. He was like, kind of laughed and was like, good offensive player, but he's not really a baseball player.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely said that. He definitely said that Mark Vientos' value to this team is with his bat. And I value him the same way. I think he has a big bat. Is he the DH? I don't know. I don't know. The way David Stearns spoke about him, he's probably going to trade him.
We'll see. That bobblehead is going down.
But
right?
we're going to get a bag of balls if you're selling him the way that David Stearns is selling.
Yeah, it's going to have to be a trade package. It's not going to be a 1-for-1 swap with anyone because I do think his value has kind of plummeted. I think he could be added on to a nice piece, especially when we're talking about like some of those like big trades for maybe an elite starting pitcher and an ace. I think that he could be a nice little addition. He's obviously a major league player that can step into a contending team. And so, we'll see if there's some value there. All right, my last takeaway from Stearns on day 2 is that I believe that the Mets are admitting that they screwed up with Ronnie Mauricio. They brought this guy up in the middle of the season. He's batting 400 in AAA. He comes up and he's serviceable. He's pretty good. He hits that huge home run against the Padres that ties it up in the 9th inning. We wound up losing that game. But, it was something where we saw him like, hey, that's clutch. That's big time. And then he just stopped playing him. And then 2 days into the last of the season, they're asking this guy now to, take over the starting role because Beatty gets hurt. I really believe that the Mets screwed up. And David Stearns talks about options way too much in that interview on day 2 with Ronnie Mauricio.
Yeah, they definitely screwed up. And I guess it's nice that David Stearns is honest. Like he comes out and he's very honestly saying like we didn't send him down when we probably should have sent him down because we wanted to preserve an option for next year. And that's insane to me. I mean, it might mean he says like if he needs a year of development in AAA, they want to be able to send him back down without potentially losing him. And if that's how you feel about the player, I don't understand why he's on the team, right? Like the Mets needed help last year, and David Stearns kept this guy on the team and then didn't play him. And then we expect that he's going to be ready to go when we needed him in a big spot. And he wasn't ready to go. He played like crap when he had to take over for Brett Beatty.
Yeah, they set him up for total disaster. Like it didn't make any sense what took place. And I heard Stearns, a question got posed. How'd you like the rotation of Beatty, of Mauricio, and Vientos? He's like, I think Mendoza did a pretty good job with them. That's way off. That's not a good job what they did. You don't just stick a guy on your bench for 30 plus games and then put him into a starting role with 2 games left in the season and expect something of him. It's not fair. It's not how you develop a young guy like this. And to hear options like you were mentioning, and the fact that the 2025 Mets needed wins, and there was a guy that was on their bench that wasn't providing that for them, that makes no sense to me. It really doesn't, and that's something that's a head scratcher. It's a head scratcher for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons Carlos Mendoza is absolutely on the hot seat, right? The Mets need to start this season well, otherwise he's probably going to get Willie Randolphed.
Yeah. Do not start your year like 2024, right? And expect that ownership is going to accept that and think that it's going to get turned around like it did in 24 because you're playing with fire at that point. You really are, and it's just not going to be tolerated. And I'm with you. There was times that was so frustrating with Mendoza last year. And Stearns came out and he took it on the chin and he said this was all on me. Everything that took place, I got to put a better product out there. But it wasn't, right? And if you watched the Mets last year, right, and I know you and I watched pretty much every single game, there was a lot of things that happened last year that can be put on the manager in Mendoza. Right? A lot of decisions that were questionable, a lot of things that really, for Met fans, were frustrating, right? Especially pulling those pitchers early on that wound up leading, I think, to our bullpen being depleted, a lot of guys getting injured, a lot of guys now getting Tommy John for this upcoming season that now aren't going to help us right for the following year.
Let's go on to the next major takeaway, also from the GM meeting. Scott Boras. This guy's a classic. And Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. I can't even say that. We're going to try to say what he said about Pete Alonso. Go ahead, Justin.
All right, so we got Boris discussing this pun-filled comment about Pete Alonso. There's no doubt Pete's pursuers are primed to pay the power piper. Pete picked a perfect period to play preeminently at a primary position. A playoff parched plethora will pounce to participate in the polar plunge. Dude, are you kidding me? I hate you, Scott Boris. I really do. When you speak, you bother me so much. And I can't. I can't. That is a ridiculous statement to make. How is someone supposed to respond to that? When you hear that, people, he doesn't care because he is a multi millionaire. I don't know if he's in the billions at this point, but that's a joke. That's an absolute joke.
I think he spends his entire season thinking about ways that he can talk about his players and use as many forms of alliteration as possible. It's clear that this guy went to English class and learned what alliteration is.
Yeah, great.
That's
Scott
all
Boris,
I got out.
you're really
Out of
smart.
what he said.
Yeah, Scott, you're really smart, and we appreciate that. But we really don't, because we're baseball fans, and we really just care about baseball. We don't care about any type of English language going on.
If you're gonna speak, dude, if you're gonna say that when you speak, shut up.
Yeah, please. All right. But we'll get into Pete. All right. Despite the pun-filled comments, he does make other comments about Pete that make a lot of sense. He talks about him being able to play in New York, and that for a lot of players, that's something that's difficult, right? He discussed his ability to be successful in the playoffs, and we saw him again in 2024 really having a successful playoff run. And he talks about being reliable, and you cannot take any of those things away from Pete Alonso, right? He plays 162 games every single year. The man is one of the most reliable players that there is in baseball. And so, despite this ridiculous comments that Boris makes, he does make some other good points that, as a baseball fan and as a Mets fan, you can't ignore those things about Pete Alonso for sure.
I agree. I love Pete. Pete Alonso is my favorite player. It's safe to say that. And I don't want to see him leave this team, but no one's listening to Scott Boris after he says that ridiculous pun-filled comment about these really important things that need to be said about Pete Alonso. Like, you're turning people away from listening to what you have to say. Pete's a great baseball player. He gets no love from anybody. Like, people just crap on this guy and his abilities and never gets what he deserves to be recognized for, which is being a power hitter who delivers consistently and is playing every single day. Last around the apple topic that we'll cover, the Mets made a decision to elect 3 new members to the Mets Hall of Fame. Bobby V, makes sense.
Love
Carlos Beltran turned this franchise around with his signing, right? Brought us a lot of joy as Met fans, I think, is when we were growing up and enjoying the Mets. And then the next one is Lee Mazzilli. Justin, how do you feel about Lee Mazzilli?
I feel like this is just, I don't want to say typical Mets. Lee Mazzilli? You got the crosstown rivals, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle. And then the Mets are bringing in Lee Mazzilli. And I know, I'm not trying to poo-poo anyone, right? Like, in any type of way here. But Lee Mazzilli, that's who we bring to the table? I had to look up his stats. I had 260 for the Mets. Cool, right? Thanks. You seem like a nice guy. But that's who we're bringing into the Hall of Fame? Lee Mazzilli? Listen, I like
And everybody gets
Bobby.
in. That's what we're saying here. Everybody gets in. Everybody's going to get into the Hall of Fame for the New York Mets. So if you play for us, if you're wondering if you should sign with the New York Mets, you should. You'll be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, this podcast is going to get into the Hall of Fame for the Mets. That's what's going to happen, right?
We're going to jump now into our last segment before we close things out, the Mets GM game. I outlined my Mets plan if I were the GM of the Mets. Sid did that on the podcast last week as well. Justin, your turn. What's your plan? How do you fix the New York Mets if David Stearns hands you the keys, makes you the GM under him? Take us away.
Yeah, I think we all think we're GMs, right? Why we're doing this podcast right now is because we think we should be running the New York Mets, right? And we all think that we know a lot more than these guys who spend every single living moment thinking about the Mets, which I'm not gonna lie, I spend a lot of moments thinking about the Mets. I listen to you, I listen to yours, I listen to Sid's plan. I love Sid. I think he did a great job on the podcast. You can't bring that to the table. You can't. Tucker is not signing with the New York Mets. And that is not the guy that you want. He is a right fielder. You just signed Juan Soto to a 15-year contract. That man's not playing DH. Stearns came out and said he's not playing DH. He's 27 years old. He's also another lefty in that lineup. What the New York Mets need to do is that the New York Mets have to get themselves a right-handed power bat that can sit behind the Soto, in between the Nimmo, and you get yourself a righty in there. That doesn't make sense for a lineup, right? And I know you can shuffle it around. Maybe you put Soto lead off, then you put Lindor two. That's not what Soto does. That's not what he's comfortable with. That's not what the New York Mets should be doing at this point. And so, Sid, right, respect you. Right, but I got totally disagree with that take. He re-signed Diaz. The fact that he wasn't already re-signed is stressing me out. Right, I heard Stearns mention Diaz. He's got the right to go into free agency and talk to other clubs and see what he's worth. We all know what he's worth. He's worth $1 more than Josh Hader. Josh Hader signed that 5-year, $100 million contract. The New York Mets need to pay this man what he deserves. And the fact that they haven't already paid him and locked him up makes me nervous. You hear the Dodgers, they cleared $100 million off of their payroll. They're sniffing around over here. At the end of the day, I think the Mets do it. I think they re-sign him, and they need to, because there is no other option for closer for the New York Mets. And Diaz wants to be here, for sure. You re-sign Pete. Now, you're a huge Pete Alonso fan, and I'm a fan. I wanted him back last year. I want the New York Mets to re-sign him. Pete Alonso should go down as one of the all-time great New York Mets players, if he's not already, okay? But he needs to end his career as a New York Met, and I'm with you. But there's got to be a little caveat. He's got to agree to play DH a little bit more. And there's already been some rumblings that he will, and it makes sense. You don't want to be labeled as a DH going into your off season. No one wants to say we're going to give this DH a 7-year or a 6-year contract. And Pete Alonso was smart to say, I'm a first baseman. I'm not a DH. But listen, Pete, you get your contract. You get paid for what you deserve. I need you to play a little bit DH here, right? We got to lock up that defense. And I'm not saying that Pete Alonso doesn't play first base. It's going to get into my further plan with, I'm with you with signing Cody Bellinger, okay? And I think that makes a lot of sense. Do I think he's going to sign? I don't. I don't think the Yankees are going to let him walk. I think he's too valuable. You talked about him and his flexibility, him playing center. He can play left. He can play right. He can play first base. And he plays at an elite level. I think a lot of players, they focus on their offense. And that makes sense. Offense runs MLB. But you can't be a bad defender. And when you are a really elite defender like you have here with Cody Bellinger, it means something. And I think he's a perfect fit, right, for what the Mets are going to do. So I know I'm asking for a lot. I want to re-sign Diaz. I want to re-sign Pete. I want to sign Cody. And then I want another starting pitcher. To me, if you can clear some cap with Senga, I think he's got some value right now. He's a cheaper option in terms of starting pitcher. He's not making a lot of money. His full no trade clause is also gone. He only can, have a no trade to 10 teams right now. And so, he's a little bit more movable than he was a year ago because he had a full no trade. That now is done. I like a guy like Brandon Woodruff, right? I like who you mentioned with Michael King, right? I think those make a lot of sense because I don't think those are going to be long-term deals. David Stearns, right? And I'm not saying he's not going to sign a guy to a long-term contract. But if you ask me, do I want to sign a 31-year-old to an 8-year contract as a starting pitcher? I don't disagree with him, right? I don't think that that's the smartest move. And so if you can get a Brandon Woodruff on a 3-year deal, right, maybe 2 years with an opt-out, you can get yourself a Michael King, as you mentioned before, on a 3-4-year contract. I think those make a lot of sense. And then the big thing, right? Let's call spade a spade here. We talked about this, right? Biggest takeaway was that the New York Mets need to go big game hunting for a starting pitcher. And I think they're going to be in the market. I'm not saying that the New York Mets are going to do it because I don't know if one is going to become available. But you better get yourselves in there if one of those guys do become available. Obviously, Scooble. There's no reason to not be in there. You should be calling that guy every single day. He hangs up the phone on you, you call back, right? Hey, is Scooble available now? No? Hey, is Scooble available now? No? You keep going, right, until they say, please stop calling us. Otherwise, we'll never do business with you again. I like Eddie Peralta, right? Just because his contract, 1 year, $8 million. We saw what Corbin Burns was traded for. It wasn't a big package. He was on an expiring contract going up. I know you mentioned Alcantara, right, which I do like. He's going to be a little bit more expensive than a Peralta. And then I like Hunter Green. Now, Hunter Green is going to be pretty, I don't want to say similar to Scooble. He's not the same caliber pitcher, but he's under team control or team-friendly deal for a few years. And so, for me, it's got to be one of those guys, right? I need to get myself an ace. I want that 1A, 1B with Nolan McLean. You can't go into the season saying that this rookie is going to be our number one option. It's not fair. And it's something that I think for the Mets, they saw as a huge weak point from last year and one that needs to get corrected big time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that. That sounds like a great plan. If we make those moves, I think the Mets are primed for a playoff run, and I'm ready to go. That's going to bring us to the end of this pod. Great episode, Justin. Glad you were able to come on with me. Episode 3, we're gonna keep this thing rolling. We're gonna try to bring on another Met fan onto this pod. We're gonna look at some scenarios in the event that Pete Alonso is not back with the Mets, which would be largely unfortunate and really disappointing for me. And we're gonna look into scenarios on what happens if Edwin Diaz doesn't re-sign with the New York Mets. DM me, make comments towards me. Let's get you guys onto the pod. Reach out. I'd love to bring you in and have you guys tell your stories on the pod. That's going to wrap us up here on the Meet the Mets Fans podcast. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful night. Justin.
Yeah, a lot of fun, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.